At around 6 p.m. on June 16th, a formation appeared in front of Malotokmachka that only a few years earlier would hardly have been seen as a main assault force. More than 30 motorcycles and several ATVs rushed toward the village along 3 separate approach routes. There was no dense line of tanks leading the attack. There was no long column of infantry fighting vehicles carrying troops close behind. Instead, small groups moved fast, stayed spread apart, and tried to cross open ground before Ukrainian fire could lock onto them. This kind of advance placed the soldiers in a very different gamble. A motorcycle can cross terrain faster than many armored vehicles, use narrow routes, and force the enemy to track several moving targets at once. In return, the rider has almost nothing to absorb artillery fragments, bullets, or a direct FPV strike. Russia still chose this approach. And this time, some of the motorcycles carried additional equipment that suggested Moscow did not see them as a temporary solution. Russian forces were trying to turn two-wheeled vehicles into part of a new way of fighting on a battlefield under almost constant drone surveillance. So why is Russia willing to trade armor for speed? How much can the special equipment fitted to these motorcycles really change the battlefield? And at Malotokmachka, how long could this tactic survive against a defensive system already prepared to meet it? Let's find out with military force. At about 6 p.m. on June 16th, Russian assault troops moved toward Malotokmachka in Zaporizhzhia, using more than 30 motorcycles and several ATVs. Instead of forming one armored column, the force advanced along 3 separate approaches, creating several moving groups across the battlefield at the same time. According to Ukraine's 118th Separate Mechanized Brigade, this was a coordinated assault rather than a small reconnaissance action. The choice of vehicles shaped the attack from the beginning. Motorcycles allowed soldiers in small teams to move quickly across dirt tracks, narrow gaps, and uneven ground that would be harder for tanks or infantry fighting vehicles to use at the same speed. ATVs added more carrying capacity while keeping the formation light and mobile across rough terrain. The 3 routes also reduced the risk of one strike stopping the entire assault. If one group was delayed or one vehicle was hit, the other groups could continue moving without waiting for the whole force to reorganize. That gave Russian commanders a way to spread risk across a wider area. This pattern reflects a broader shift in battlefield movement. Instead of concentrating many soldiers inside a few large vehicles, Russia is increasingly using smaller platforms to move assault infantry through areas where large formations can be spotted early and targeted before they reach their objective. The logic is simple. A smaller vehicle creates a smaller target, and a dispersed formation forces the defender to watch several directions at once. That does not make the riders safe, but it can shorten the time they remain exposed while crossing open ground. This matters on a front where movement has become difficult. Roads, field tracks, tree lines, and gaps between defensive positions can become predictable routes once they are observed repeatedly. A heavy vehicle may offer stronger protection, yet its size can make it easier to identify. Motorcycles and ATVs accept the opposite trade-off. They provide less protection, but they can move faster, change direction more easily, and use routes that larger vehicles may avoid. At Malotokmachka, this approach was used on enough scale to matter. More than 30 motorcycles moving on 3 approaches created a distributed assault that depended on speed and separation rather than massed armor. The aim was to keep the attack moving even if part of the formation came under fire. That also reveals the limit of what mobility alone can achieve. Before the riders could reach the village, they still had to cross ground shaped by 2 threats that now influence almost every assault in this sector: minefields below and drones above. Those dangers explain why some of the vehicles used in the attack had been modified for a more specialized role. Some motorcycles used in the assault near Malotokmachka were reportedly fitted with front-mounted plow-like devices designed to disturb obstacles or help open a narrow path through mined ground. This pushed a basic engineering function down to a small assault vehicle. The goal was not to turn a motorcycle into a full mine-clearing machine. Heavy engineering vehicles remain better suited to opening lanes through minefields. The smaller attachment appears intended to reduce risk on a limited route and keep riders moving without waiting for larger equipment. Minefields shape movement even when they destroy nothing. Their value comes from slowing attackers, narrowing choices, and forcing them toward routes defenders can observe more easily. Once movement becomes predictable, other weapons become more effective. A minefield can influence an assault before the first mine detonates. Riders approaching suspected mined ground must reduce speed, search for safer lines, or follow paths already used by other vehicles. Each reaction increases time in exposed terrain and makes movement easier to read. For a light assault force, this is dangerous. Its advantage depends on keeping momentum and avoiding long pauses in open areas. A narrow, safe corridor can become a funnel where several vehicles pass through the same space, making the route easier to monitor and target. This explains why a crude clearing attachment could have tactical value. If it helps a small group continue moving without waiting for specialized engineering support, it preserves tempo. Yet the solution remains limited. It may help with one obstacle, but it cannot remove the wider problem created by a prepared defensive zone. The second adaptation addressed drones. Some vehicles in the Russian formation were reported to carry mobile electronic warfare equipment intended to interfere with the control links used by Ukrainian FPV drones. The purpose is not always to destroy the drone. Often, the goal is to weaken or interrupt the connection between the aircraft and its operator. Even a short disruption can matter when a motorcycle is crossing exposed ground at speed. A few extra seconds may allow the rider to reach a tree line, pass behind terrain, or leave the most dangerous part of the approach. This creates local electronic protection around the vehicle. Still, local jamming does not remove every threat. Drones can use different frequencies, operators can change methods, and surveillance can continue through other sensors. Taken together, the mine-clearing attachment and mobile electronic warfare equipment show that Russia was trying to give a light vehicle several forms of self-support. The motorcycle was no longer only a way to carry a soldier quickly. It was being adapted to survive specific hazards long enough to keep the assault moving. The result is a vehicle that can assist its advance without waiting for every task to be centralized. This matters because these adaptations reduce dependence on larger support vehicles during the most exposed stage of an advance. A motorcycle carrying its own protection can move with fewer supporting platforms nearby, which may reduce the number of visible targets and allow assault groups to preserve their speed for longer. The concept combines a small profile, high speed, limited support against mines, and local electronic protection. Each feature addresses a separate weakness, but none provides the physical protection found on an armored vehicle. Artillery fragments, infantry fire, mines, and a direct drone strike can still cause severe losses. These modifications show Russian forces experimenting with how much protection can be moved onto smaller platforms without losing the speed that makes them useful. That leads to a larger battlefield question. To understand why Moscow accepts less armor in exchange for speed in smaller vehicles, it is necessary to examine how drones are changing the relative value of tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, motorcycles, and ATVs across the war. Tanks and infantry fighting vehicles still provide protection and firepower that motorcycles cannot replace. Their armor gives crews a better chance of surviving fragments, small arms fire, and near misses, while their weapons can support infantry during an assault. Yet those advantages come with a growing problem. Large vehicles are easier to detect on a battlefield, watched by reconnaissance drones, thermal sensors, and forward observers. Size matters because a larger vehicle creates a visual and thermal signature. Engine noise, exhaust heat, tracks, and movement along roads can reveal its position. Once identified, a tank or IFV may become a priority target because destroying one can remove both combat power and transport capacity. This changes the calculation behind movement near the front before combat even begins. Heavy armor remains valuable, but protection now has to be weighed against visibility. Motorcycles offer a very different balance. They are smaller, faster, cheaper, and easier to spread across several routes. Instead of placing many soldiers inside a few armored vehicles, Commanders can divide an assault force into multiple small groups, making the formation harder to stop with a single strike. That dispersion also allows units to approach from different directions and use narrow tracks or gaps that larger vehicles cannot exploit as easily. A motorcycle does not need the same road width, turning space or ground strength as a heavy armored platform. This gives assault troops more options when the main routes are watched or blocked. Motorcycles also spread risk across more platforms, so losing one does not remove the carrying capacity of a squad. The rider gains mobility, but loses almost every form of physical protection. ATVs fill some of the space between motorcycles and armored vehicles. They are larger than motorcycles and usually slower, but they can carry more ammunition, equipment, supplies, or personnel while still moving across rough ground. This makes them useful for more than the first assault. An ATV can support resupply, move weapons closer to a position, carry communication equipment, or help transport wounded soldiers when larger vehicles cannot safely reach the area. Their off-road ability also allows units to reduce dependence on predictable roads. Even so, ATVs remain lightly protected. They may offer more stability and carrying capacity, but they do not provide the armor of an IFV. Their value therefore comes from flexibility and mobility, rather than from surviving direct hits. ATVs offer a similar advantage with more payload. Across all three vehicle types, commanders are balancing protection, mobility, signature, cost, and the time spent under constant enemy observation. The deeper change is not simply about choosing one vehicle over another. Russian forces are trying to reduce the time soldiers remain exposed to enemy observation. In this model, speed becomes a form of protection because every second saved can reduce the window available for detection, identification, and attack. This is a shift from physical protection toward what can be called temporal protection. A tank survives by using armor after it is found. A motorcycle tries to survive by spending less time in the place where it can be found and targeted. That approach carries serious risk. If the rider is detected early, there is little armor to absorb the consequences. The tactic therefore depends on crossing dangerous ground before the defender completes the targeting cycle. At Mala Tokmachka, that condition became decisive. The concept could work only if Russian riders moved through the danger zone faster than Ukraine could organize a response. Instead, the defenders detected the formation while it was still approaching the village. Ukraine's advantage began before the Russian riders reached the village. According to the 118th Separate Mechanized Brigade, Ukrainian forces detected the assault group while it was still moving along the approaches to Mala Tokmachka. That early warning changed the battle because speed is most valuable when the defender has little time to understand what is happening. The response can be viewed as a kill chain. Detection came first, followed by tracking, route assessment, target assignment, and engagement. Reconnaissance drones and forward observers did more than locate motorcycles. They helped Ukrainian units understand which paths the Russian groups were using and where those paths were likely to lead. That distinction matters. A defender who only sees one moving target must react to the target itself. A defender who sees the pattern can prepare for the next position, choose which group matters most, and place weapons where the formation is likely to appear. By building that picture early, Ukraine reduced the value of Russia's three separate approach routes. The battlefield around Mala Tokmachka also limited how much freedom the Russian groups had. Minefields, damaged roads, open fields, tree lines, and prepared defensive positions can force even a dispersed formation toward a smaller number of usable corridors. The motorcycles remained separated, but the terrain still shaped where they could move. This gave Ukrainian forces a way to concentrate surveillance without watching every meter of ground equally. Once routes were identified, drones and observers could focus on crossing points, narrow tracks, and open areas where riders had fewer options to change direction. The next layer was fire coordination. FPV drones were suited to chasing moving vehicles, while artillery could strike approach corridors or areas where several riders came close together. Infantry weapons then covered the final routes leading toward the settlement. These systems did not need to perform the same task. Their value came from covering different stages of the Russian advance. The result was a defensive system in which terrain, observation, and weapons supported one another. The Russian formation still had speed, but it was moving through space that had become easier to read. Russian mobile electronic warfare may have complicated some Ukrainian drone operations, but it did not break the reconnaissance and fire control process. Even if one FPV link was disturbed, other sensors, observers, and weapons could still contribute to the response. That is the central weakness exposed in this phase of the battle. A motorcycle can cross ground quickly, but it cannot recover tactical surprise once the entire formation has been tracked. Speed continues to reduce travel time, yet the defender is no longer reacting blindly. According to the Ukrainian account, fighting continued for several hours, and the assault group failed to enter Malotokmachka. By then, the contest had shifted away from mobility. Ukraine had enough time to follow the Russian movement, organize fires, and keep pressure on the approaches before the riders reached the built-up area. From that point, the key issue was no longer how fast the motorcycles could move. It was how much damage the assault force could absorb before losing enough men and vehicles to stop the attack entirely. According to Ukraine's 118th Separate Mechanized Brigade, the Russian assault force suffered heavy losses before reaching Malotokmachka. The brigade reported that 26 Russian soldiers were killed and more than 10 others were wounded during several hours of fighting. Ukrainian forces also claimed that some wounded troops were left behind after the attack lost momentum. These figures come from a Ukrainian battlefield report, so they should be treated as claims from one side rather than independently confirmed totals. The location of those losses is important. Most of the damage was reported along the approaches to the village, which means the assault force was being worn down before Russian infantry could establish positions inside the settlement. That reduced the number of troops available to continue the push and made it harder for commanders to maintain pressure across all three routes. Once casualties began to rise, the formation also faced a growing problem of evacuation. Moving wounded soldiers away from an area still under observation and fire requires time, vehicles, and secure access, all of which become harder to provide during a failed assault. Vehicle losses added another layer to the collapse. Ukraine reported that more than 20 motorcycles and around 10 ATVs were destroyed, disabled, or abandoned during the fighting. Those numbers matter because the assault depended heavily on mobility. The motorcycles and ATVs were not simply transport before contact. They were central to the entire concept of moving small groups quickly across exposed ground. The distinction between destroyed, disabled, and abandoned vehicles also matters. A vehicle that survives physically can still be removed from the fight if its crew cannot recover it under continued Ukrainian observation. Losing a large part of that vehicle pool weakened the formation in several ways. Riders who lost their machines had fewer options for rapid movement, while surviving groups had to continue with less support and less flexibility. A tactic built around speed becomes much harder to sustain once the platforms providing that speed begin disappearing. The scale of the losses also indicates that this was not a small reconnaissance patrol. It was a coordinated assault involving enough vehicles and troops to make the failure operationally significant at the local level. The most important result was not the number of motorcycles left on the battlefield. It was the failure to enter Malotokmachka. According to the Ukrainian account, Russian troops were stopped before they could establish a foothold inside the village. The combination of speed, dispersion, electronic support, and mine-related adaptations did not generate enough momentum to break through the defensive system. By the end of the engagement, the assault had lost both people and the mobility that its plan depended on. That outcome explains what happened, but it does not yet explain why the tactic failed so quickly once contact began. The deeper answer lies in the timing of the battle, especially the race between Russian movement and Ukraine's ability to detect, track, and strike the formation before it crossed the danger zone. Speed matters in a motorcycle assault because it reduces the time soldiers spend inside a dangerous area. A light vehicle can cross open ground quickly, use several routes, and move from one patch of cover to another before the defender has much time to react. In this kind of operation, crossing time becomes one of the most important variables. The second variable is detection time. If Ukrainian reconnaissance sees the formation too late, Russian riders may already be close to a tree line, trench, building, or drop-off point before the defense fully understands the direction of the assault. At that stage, even a rapid response may arrive too late to stop the first groups from reaching cover. The third variable is reaction time. Once a target is detected, information still has to move through the defensive system. Units must confirm what they are seeing, pass coordinates, select the right weapon, and engage before the target changes position. A motorcycle assault has its best chance when crossing time is shorter than the combined detection and reaction time of the defender. The whole concept therefore depends on winning a race measured in seconds rather than in kilometers alone. At Malotok-Machka, that balance worked against the Russian force. Ukrainian units detected the assault while the groups were still on the approaches and had enough time to organize a response. The riders continued to move quickly, but speed no longer offered the same protection because the defense was already tracking their direction of travel. This is where tactical surprise becomes decisive. Dispersion can reduce the damage caused by one strike, and speed can shorten exposure, but neither advantage removes the danger of being seen early. Once persistent surveillance reduces detection time, and an efficient kill chain reduces reaction time, the safe window available to a light assault becomes very small. The lesson is not that motorcycles have no battlefield value. Their value depends on timing. They work best when movement stays ahead of the defender's ability to understand and respond. At Malotok-Machka, Ukraine won that race before the riders reached the village. That does not end Russia's search for faster ways to move infantry through drone-dominated terrain. Malotok-Machka is one example inside a wider contest around the Orikhiv axis, where each Russian adaptation encourages another Ukrainian response, and each Ukrainian improvement pushes Moscow to search for another way through. Malotok-Machka shows why even a small village can matter when it sits on an important approach toward Orikhiv. Control of roads, tree lines, and narrow routes around the settlement directly affects how Russian forces can keep pressure on Ukrainian defenses in western Zaporizhia. The motorcycle assault also reflects a wider change in the war. Russia is trying to move infantry with smaller formations, faster vehicles, mine-clearing adaptations, and local electronic warfare. Ukraine is answering with persistent surveillance, prepared terrain, FPV drones, artillery, and infantry fire linked through faster targeting cycles. The battle on June 16th showed the limits of mobility. Speed can improve survivability only when troops move faster than the defender can detect, track, and engage them. That race will continue. Russia will keep searching for ways to reduce exposure, while Ukraine will keep trying to shorten the time between seeing a target and striking it. Malotok-Machka was one round in that larger contest. Wars are not only decided by weapons, but also by how armies adapt, how societies respond, and how quickly technology changes the cost of fighting. Understanding these battles helps us see both the realities of modern warfare and why preventing future conflicts matters just as much as studying how they are fought. Subscribe to Military Force for more clear, fact-based analysis of weapons, strategy, and the forces shaping war and peace around the world.